Good morning, everybody. My name is Fred Malaby. I'm a parishioner at St. David's. This morning, the text of the reflection is going to be from the first lesson that was read about the story of Joseph. The book of Joseph, or the story of Joseph, is one that throughout my Christian journey I've been drawn to. Now, my first encounter with this was as a kid in Sunday school, and that wasn't such a good encounter. It was the story of Joseph in the coat of many colors, which was okay. But then there was the requisite coloring of the coat of many colors, and I never was very good at coloring, never really enjoyed it. There's one subject that I got a D on on my report card. Also, as a kid in the 1960s, I was probably between 7 and 8, I didn't see the big deal about a multicolored cloak. I mean, who wears cloaks anyway? And it would have been much more, now having a Schwinn Air bicycle, that would have been neat. But as I got older, I found a lot of meaning as I read and studied the story. I've wondered about envy as I studied the story of the brothers disliking Joseph. Thought about despair as I read about Joseph being sold into slavery, and even delighted in some of the messages that can be found in the way that the editor weaves together the story weaves together the three traditions that make up the stories of Genesis. It's probably one of the stories that has the most subliminal messages in the book of Genesis. Now, just in case you haven't been following along, maybe you missed a week of the story, let me kind of backtrack and remind everyone about the backstory to how we get to this point. Joseph's father was Jacob, and when Jacob is a young man, he sets out on a journey to find a wife. And as he's going along, he gets to a relative named Laban, and he meets, and Laban has two daughters, Leah and Rachel. Rachel being the younger of the two. Now, Jacob is smitten by Rachel, and it's instant love. So he makes a deal with Laban that he will work for Laban for 7 years, at the end of which he will win Rachel as his wife. So Jacob works for Laban for 7 years, and at the end of 7 years, Laban pulls a fast one on him. He sends Leah into the marriage chamber. Now, I don't know how he missed it. It's dark. Maybe Jacob was either not very observant or had his mind on other things, but he didn't realize the switch until the next morning. Now he's upset, but it's too late. But Laban says to him, well, I had to marry the older daughter first. If you want Rachel as well, why don't you hang around for another 7 years and work for me? So that's what Jacob did. So Jacob winds up with two wives, one of whom he prefers, Rachel, more than the other. Now, the way it worked out, however, Leah and her maidservant are more fertile than Rachel and her maidservant. Leah and her maidservant are responsible for 8 sons and a daughter. Rachel's maidservant has 2 more sons. Finally, Rachel has 2 sons, Joseph and Benjamin. So Joseph is a great deal younger than his brothers. And you have a built-in competition between the two families, if you will. The issue of the different women. So then you have the story of the coat of many colors. Joseph loved Rachel. Rachel dies. So now he transfers that love to his youngest children, and he shows favoritism to them. He gives Joseph this coat of many colors, and that was a special thing at the time. And then on top of that, he's a typical 16-year-old boy. You know, he has a dream about how Everybody's going to bow down to him, so he runs around telling everybody about it. He's just very sure of himself, and his brothers consider him odious and overbearing. They don't realize that he's being a 16-year-old kid. So at some point, the brothers are out tending the livestock, and Joseph says to, and Jacob says to Joseph, take some stuff, take some supplies, some provisions to your older brothers. And they see the older brother coming. The older brothers see him coming in his coat of many colors. So they grab him, they tie him up. They think about killing him, but they decide instead to sell him to some merchants that are coming by, and he's sold into slavery. Now the brothers don't see him again until what we're seeing here. In the meantime, and I think in the last couple of weeks we've been reading about this, Joseph winds up through a number of misadventures, winds up the vizier of Egypt. Now he does this because he predicts to the Pharaoh that there are going to be 7 years of good crops, very good crops, and then 7 years of famine. And the Pharaoh says, well, if that's the case, and he recommends to the Pharaoh that they, during the 7 good years, that they take a lot of the grain that's excess and store it for the 7 bad years. And so the Pharaoh says to him, makes him the vizier, which is the equivalent of a prime minister, and then says, oversee this. So that's what he does, is he administers this, and he's pretty successful. We're now 2 years into the famine, and Jacob sends his brothers to buy some food. Guess who they're going to buy it from? Joseph. So they don't recognize him. There's several manipulations that Joseph goes through, why he does this, does what he does. There are several explanations that historians have tried to imply to it. But bottom line is we wind up here. Joseph has recognized his brothers very early on, and now he's finally to the point that he could burst. He wants to talk to them, and he does. And he presents himself as Joseph, their long-lost brother. Okay, that's the story. Now I want us to think a bit. Imagine, if you will, that you were one of those brothers. Let's say Reuben, the oldest. You were probably in your early 30s when you did what you did. And you've lived with this for quite a while. Subliminal guilt. You don't know what happened to him, but you know that when you brought back that robe and you said to Jacob, you know, it was an animal that killed him. We don't know what happened. We just found this robe. You knew it was a lie. And you've lived with that guilt all this time. Maybe you've tried to think of a way that, well, he was okay. If you were the brother that got him out of the pit and was going to sell him and sold him, you said, at least he didn't wind up dead. Various methods that they tried to use to salve their conscience. Now they're being presented with Joseph, who is not only there, but he is very, very powerful. Egypt at the time was the most powerful country in the world, or at least in the Middle East. And Joseph was the number 2 guy. So they had to have been concerned. Imagine you've been made out. You've been pointed out. You have to face the thing that you may have been putting in the back of your mind for the longest time. Okay, now that we've looked at the brothers, let's look at Joseph's point of view. Imagine if Joseph had not been as magnanimous as he was. Imagine if he had done what I think many of us would want to do. I want to get even. If he'd let that anger, that desire to get even, fester, if he'd try, and that now he has this big chance, but he doesn't do it. Why doesn't he do it? Because he's worked out his anger. Don't tell me he wasn't angry about this originally. Of course he was. Disappointed, angry, whatever. But by praying to God, by bringing this before God, by realizing that he had made mistakes too, he was able to free himself from that guilt and that anger. All of us have somebody or something that has been that we've been slighted by someone, and it's easy to hang on to anger or to treat guilt by saying, I didn't really do it, it didn't really happen, or it was their fault, they asked for it. But Joseph looks it in the face and says, we need to get past this. And what we see here in this story is reconciliation by the way Joseph acts. Now imagine, if this isn't the end of the story for the other brothers, they've got to go back and they've got to admit to Joseph what they did. Can you imagine that discussion? And they've got to go through all of what it takes in order for there to be a complete reconciliation. Okay, so that's most of what I wanted to say, but I wanted to say it's particularly relevant today. Right now, with all of the Black Lives Matter movement, all of the desire to have reconciliation to people of color, to Native Americans, to the equality of the genders, all of us have something that we feel guilty about. All of us have something that we need to ask for forgiveness. And the Christians have a unique role here. You know, the world at large, I'm not responsible for any of this. You know, we can deflect all we want, but ultimately we have to go through a process of reconciliation. Christians understand that we are sinners, understand that in God's eyes, that God loves us, but that all of us are sinners. As Romans said today, we all are in prison so he can show mercy. And so we have a unique role at this point in time, trying to help others who don't have the advantage that we have of knowing God's love and the reconciliation that God gives us through the forgiveness of sins. And we can help the world heal. Thank you.